By February 1917, it became clear to all that the position of Tsar Nicholas II on the throne was untenable. On the 2nd of March, his reign and dynasty came to an abrupt end. The workers of Petrograd, particularly in factories like the Putilov ironworks, provided the final momentum to eject him from power. They came out of the winter months with little improvement in living conditions on the horizon. Civil disobedience soon emerged, creating a tense environment. The Tsarina condemned the strikers as hooligans and grew suspicious of members of the Duma she believed were undermining the government response. The newly unemployed wandered the streets while some women spent almost 24 hours in queues for provisions. When the public became aware of plans to introduce the rationing of bread towards the end of February, the revolutionary floodgates opened. Riots and scuffles began to take place. The February Revolution had begun. On International Women's Day, the 23rd of February, it was women who took the lead in politicizing and focusing the discontent simmering in the capital. They marched to the factories in the Vyborg district of Petrograd and taunted the men who would not support them as cowards. Women were the ones who took the revolutionary initiative, even overturning trams to block entire streets, while the men were more cautious. Local Bolshevik leaders actually had a big demonstration planned for May Day and so tried to dismiss the women, but they took no notice. By the afternoon, the workers of the Putilov engineering works took up the cause and a huge crowd soon mobilized, marching on the city center. They crossed the ice of the frozen river Neva and burst onto Nevsky Prospect, the main street in Petrograd. Over the next 3 days, the demonstrations grew beyond just industrial action and adopted a more political nature. Demands for an end to the war and the Tsar accompanied the demands for bread. Observers reported that there was almost a holiday atmosphere in the city as all corners of society joined the ranks of the workers marching toward the center of the city. There was no centralized organization of events. All the main leaders of the revolutionary parties were in Siberia or abroad. But socialist cells, particularly the Bolsheviks, were active in spreading protest and mobilizing the workers to the streets with their red flags and banners. A de facto general strike was afoot by the 24th as most factories and restaurants in the city had closed. The weekend of the 25th and the 26th of February was the time when the revolutionary momentum mobilized in the previous days by the Bolsheviks and the women would be faced with a real test. Past demonstrations had been effectively dealt with by the Cossacks and other troops. This time, the soldiers took up arms alongside the demonstrators. The NCOs, non-commissioned officers, i.e. people promoted based on merit, not blood, in the army played a key role in this. These officers were closer with the soldiers under their command than the senior officers were. Many of the soldiers in the Petrograd garrison were young reservists fresh from the villages who identified more with the people on the streets than the aristocracy. They were desperate not to be sent to the bloodbath of the front and despaired at the incompetence with which the war was being handled. The man who can most be accredited with the mutiny of the soldiers was, paradoxically, the Tsar himself. When he heard about the trouble in Petrograd, he ordered the troops to put down the disorder. On Sunday, the 26th of February, some regiments opened fire on the crowds, killing a number of demonstrators. This tipped the scales and enraged the crowds and now forced the soldiers to choose a side. Were they going to join the people or fire on them? One by one, regiments joined the people. However, this was not unanimous and there was sporadic fighting between regiments with a number of officers killed, but this was largely snuffed out by the 27th of February. As Orlando Fidges aptly puts it, the mutiny of the Petrograd garrison turned the disorders of the last 4 days into a full-scale revolution. Whereas the army remained loyal in 1905, they mutinied and joined the revolution in 1917. What changed in the meantime? The army of February 1917 was a very different army to the one mobilized in 1914. Of the 14 million men sent to the front, half of them were dead, injured, missing or captured by the Central Powers. Many of the fresh officers were socialist and liberal-leaning peasants who replaced the aristocratic conservatives that had dominated the command structure previously. The generals also contributed to the Tsar's abdication. When Alexander Guchkov, leader of the Octobrists, asked the High Command in the winter of 1916 about plans for a coup d'état to dethrone the emperor, he understood that they would not intervene to save him. By February 1917, the generals considered Tsar Nicholas liable for the failures in the war, although many were traditionalists who hoped to retain the monarchy as an institution. The main struggle now took place between the soldiers and the police. The police had been the main enforcers of the will of the Tsarist regime for decades, and now they had the role of attacking the demonstrators and revolutionaries, who included trained soldiers at this point. They had a habit of putting snipers on the rooftops to fire down on the crowds. Soldiers systematically rooted them out, throwing them off the roofs to the cheers of the crowd below. Police stations were ransacked and their records destroyed. The prisons were thrown open and the prisoners, many jailed for political opposition to the Tsar, released indiscriminately. The revolution of February 1917 was not a bloodless revolution. Some estimates put the total death toll at around 1,500, with several thousands more wounded. The situation in the imperial capital had spiraled out of control by the 28th of February. Although in many ways the people showed remarkable self-restraint, crime was beginning to grow, partly because of all the criminals released, and there was increased violence. Armed gangs looted shops and private houses of the wealthy. Most people called on the Duma to take control of the situation. The socialists were, however, already forming their own body to represent the interests of the workers, the Soviet. While these events unfolded, the Tsar was still at Mogilev, in modern-day Belarus, and did not comprehend the seriousness of the situation. Mikhail Rodzianko, president of the Duma, sent him a telegram explaining just how bad things were and suggesting that a new government be formed with more power given to the elected representatives, i.e. the first steps towards constitutional monarchy, in the style of Britain. Nicholas's answer was to suspend the Duma and send loyal troops to march on the capital to restore order. The defiant Duma members, realizing the Tsar could not be reasoned with, remained in the Tauride palace and held informal meetings. Meanwhile, the crowds of people outside had not dispersed, but started demanding the Duma take control of the situation. On the 27th, the Duma formed a special committee made up of representatives of the main political parties. It soon became clear to the committee that the revolution had gone too far for the Tsar to be involved in any sort of government. The Russian army high command came to a similar conclusion, although they preferred the monarchy as a whole to stay intact, and halted troop movements to Petrograd. The emperor's train was stopped outside of the capital, and when the generals came to inform the Tsar that he had lost their support, Nicholas knew the time had come. He abdicated in favor of his brother, Michael, who refused the throne. And just like that, the centuries-old Romanov dynasty came to a whimpering, abrupt end.